Hey, thank you all for coming tonight. This does my heart, makes my heart glow from everybody coming out on this absolutely lovely evening. So thank you all. I know you're all a wonderful group of dedicated readers, and we're really excited to have Monica speak with you all. First of all, my name is Kent Watson. I sit on the Lake Oswego Library Advisory Board and the Friends of Lake Oswego Library Advisory Board. Unfortunately, Andrew Edwards is home sick this evening, so he asked me to step in and talk to you all on behalf of the Friends of the Lake Oswego Library Board. I'd like to first ask you all to thank the Friends of the Lake Oswego Library Board and the Lake Oswego Library Advisory Board for help with LO Reads. And if everyone could rise that's on those two boards, I'd appreciate it. We'd love to give you all a hand. These are two groups of dedicated folks that really give unselfishly to the Lake Oswego Library to create such wonderful events, and they do a ton of work. If you're not familiar with the Friends of Lake Oswego Library Board, we raise money to provide literacy activities and education for the community. Joining the Friends is very easy, and you can join for as little as $25. And in fact, tonight, we're really looking to add 25 new members this evening. So if you're interested in joining or have questions, please stop by the Friends table after the event ends. Please also thank the City of Lake Oswego, Lake Oswego Rotary, the Lakewood Center for the Arts, the Lake Oswego Review, and many other dedicated businesses, sponsors that support LO Reads each year. We're grateful for their sponsorship of this amazing programming. The Lake Oswego community benefits greatly from the funding provided by the Friends of the Library. Membership dues and boutique profits provide much needed funding for very important and impactful library programs that support all ages and income levels in our community. By the way, it's spring cleaning time, so if you have any books you would like to donate, please stop by the boutique and drop them off, and we do provide tax receipt for all donations. If you're wondering how the community benefits from the Friends donations, let me explain. The notable programs, classes, and events that benefit the Friends funding include this event, the Lake Oswego Reads, which, as we all know, brings together Lake Oswego residents together to read the same book and learn and discuss its themes every April with hundreds of free copies. In fact, we gave away 600 copies this year of the book chosen and distributed to residents each year. Secondly, the Summer Library Challenge for all ages. Research repeatedly shows that reading over the summer is vital to preventing what we call the summer slide in reading skills for school-age kids. The library program for all ages supports early literacy development for our youngest community members and promotes reading enjoyment and lifelong learning in teens and adults. Thirdly, the Friends support many early literacy programs to prepare our children to be strong readers and succeed in school. These programs include Books for Babies, 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten, and storytime classes in languages other than English, including Mandarin, Spanish, as well as baby sign language. Fourthly, the long-standing First Tuesday music series brings free music concerts featuring talented local musicians to our backyard, making high-quality live music available to everyone, not just those who can afford tickets or are willing to travel to Portland. Additionally, the library's monthly author series, trivia nights, and other high-quality educational and cultural events supported by the Friends, including our city's annual MLK celebration and the Lunar New Year's Festival. Lastly, I'd like you all to put your hands together for two people that I don't think get enough thanks during the entire LO Reads program, and that's volunteer and special events Coordinator Nancy Nyland, and Library Director Melissa Kelly. Could you please put your hands together for them? Melissa, can you come out? And let me introduce Kelly right now, our Library Director.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Kent, and to all of our Friends of the Library members for their incredible work to support all of the library's programs, including this wonderful program this evening, Lake Oswego Reads, for bringing all these wonderful events to our community. My name is Melissa Kelly, and as the city's library director, I'm delighted to welcome you this evening. Thank you for being here for this very special event featuring Monica Wood, the author of our 19th Lake Oswego Reads book, How to Read a Book. I really loved this novel, and I heard from so many of you that this novel touched you as well. It is an honor to welcome Monica Wood to Lake Oswego this evening to speak with us about her inspiration for this book, her unforgettable characters, and how the themes developed during her writing process. Following her remarks at the podium, Ms. Wood will be joined by Lake Oswego resident educator and Lake Oswego Reads Steering Committee member, Catherine Phelps, for an onstage conversation. The conversation will include questions submitted by our community members through the library's website. We're also joined by American Sign Language interpreters Sarika Mehta and Sarah Smith. At the conclusion of tonight's program, Ms. Wood will be able to sign your books, and 2 lucky winners of the Lake Oswego Reads passport drawing will be announced. I'd also like to ask a friendly reminder to please silence your cell phones if you haven't yet done so. But before we welcome Ms. Wood to the stage, it's my privilege to first recognize and thank the amazing sponsors, staff, and volunteers who make this event possible. As Kent mentioned, we're immensely grateful to the amazing Friends of the Library and our other title sponsors, the City of Lake Oswego Rotary, Lakewood Center for the Arts, and the Lake Oswego Review. We also have help from a tremendous group of local supporter sponsors detailed in our Lake Oswego Reads brochure and tonight's digital program that you saw on the screen earlier. Please help me to recognize all of our Lake Oswego Reads sponsors with one more round of applause. Furthermore, it's my pleasure to recognize our incredible Lake Oswego Reads Steering Committee and Events Committee member volunteers who each year spend a lot of thoughtful time selecting a book for our community and developing a month-long series of events that help us explore those themes and come together as a community for discussion, and also work in partnership with many community organizations. And of course, none of this could happen without our very talented volunteer and special events coordinator, Nancy. So big shout out to Nancy. Thank you. And now, what we've all been waiting for. It's my privilege to introduce our guest of honor. Monica Wood is a novelist, memoirist, and playwright. She is the 2024 winner of the Sarah Josepha Hale Award, honoring contributions to the literary arts in New England. Her previous novel, the best-selling 1 in a Million Boy, has been published in 22 languages and 30 countries and won a 2017 Nautilus Award and the New England Society Book Award. She's also the author of When We Were the Kennedys, a bestseller Oprah magazine summer reading pick, and winner of the May Sarton Memoir Award and the 2016 Maine Literary Award. Her novel, Any Bitter Thing, was an American Booksellers Association bestseller and BookSense Top 10 pick. And her other fiction includes Ernie's Ark, which has been excerpted on NPR's Selected Shorts and selected by several towns and cities for their One Book, One Community read. She also wrote My Only Story, a finalist for the Kate Chopin Award, and Secret Language, her first novel. Her widely anthologized short stories have won a Pushcart Prize and been featured on public radio. She also writes books for writers and teachers. Her nonfiction has appeared in Oprah, New York Times, Martha Stewart Living, Parade, and many other publications. Her first play, Papermaker, debuted at Portland Stage in Maine. In an extended run, its best-selling play ever. So it seems like we have a lot more reading to do. Monica Wood is also the winner of the Maine Humanities Council Carlson Prize for contributions to the public humanities and the recipient of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance Distinguished Achievement Award for contributions to the literary arts. How lucky are we that we now have the opportunity to hear her speak with our community. Without further ado, please welcome our special guest, author Monica Wood, to the stage.
That was nice. Hi. Okay, my book is gone, but that's all right. I'll just wing it. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. I have been treated like the Queen of Sheba since I set foot off the plane. I came from Portland, Maine, and just so you know, we call you the other Portland. So to get that straight, it's been, oh my goodness, such a pleasure watching from afar all of the programming that you have all done. It's been a pleasure to meet the artists who did the art show. I hope all of you have had a chance to see this art show. I was deeply moved, and I've been close to tears several times tonight, and there was a beautiful, beautiful song by Maria. I can't remember her last name right now, but it was so moving. And it's on the guitar, and it felt to me as she was playing it, it felt a lot like the writing process. It had, you started somewhere, and then you went somewhere else, and then you went back to where you started, and then went somewhere else, and there were starts and stops, and this beautiful flowing process that feels very much like writing a novel. So it was a perfectly done song, and it was done just for me, and I just feel so very, very grateful. Writers spend a lot of time typing alone in a room, and getting to meet readers, especially so many, although I can't really even, oh my heavens. Okay, there's a lot of people here. Wow, that is really nice. Okay, I need to tell you something. So every time you get a bunch of writers together, we start telling war stories about who had the worst book event ever. And there are a ton of these stories. So, and I almost always win. There are a few worse ones than I have had. But the first one, it wasn't really terrible, but this was my first novel. It was 1993. And back then, publishers did it a little differently. They didn't really send you out on tour. They sent you to bookstores. And you would walk into the bookstore, and there would be a table set up, and your books would be on the table, and there would be a little sign there that said, "Meet the author from noon to 2." And there you would sit at your table all by yourself for 2 hours. And it was a very awkward situation because even well-meaning patrons would come in, and they'd kind of like, okay, if I make eye contact, I might have to buy a book. So I was this might have been my second book event I ever did. The first one was in my hometown, so, everybody I ever knew in my life was there. And so this is at a Barnes & Noble in Augusta, Maine, which is about an hour from my house. So I had driven up there for an hour to sit at this table for 2 hours with my Meet the Author sign. And at the merciful end of these 2 hours, this woman comes over, and she's very elderly, and she's got a walker, and she kind of clicks over to me, and she stands in front of the table. She looks at me, she looks over the pile of books, and she says, "Did you write those?" And I said, "Yes, I did." "All of them?" I said, "Well, it's actually the same copy. If you see, they all have the same cover. It's my first novel." And she waited a moment, and she looked at me, and she looked at the books, and she said, "Then this must be the culmination of all your hopes and dreams." And I was about halfway home when I thought, you know what? This is the culmination of all my hopes and dreams. Yeah. And then there was another one. This one always wins. So it was Boulder, Colorado. And my nephew was getting married. And this was for my third novel. And I was on tour anyway, but I hadn't gone anywhere out west. But I told my publicist, I said, I'm going to be in Boulder on this particular weekend. And she said, "Great, we're going to add this store to the list. They do a lot of book events. You should have a really great time there." I said, "Super." So we get there, and this is a huge bookstore, and they have a ginormous event space in the bottom part of the store. So I get there, and there were probably 700 chairs set up. And it was one of those rooms where you do have the option of there's walls that close so you can make the rooms a little more intimate. And there was this big stage like this and a lectern. And the thing is, all those chairs was set up because the author who was there the night before me was Bill Clinton. So there I was with Bill Clinton's invisible audience. And the only people who came were my dear nephew and his wedding party, which was delightfully large. A guy who came in off the street for the wine, and my husband's old girlfriend. I know. Yeah, good times. So that's a little bit of the glamorous life on the road to the author. But I have to say I've been very gratified lately. I did a One Book, One Community a couple of nights ago in Wallingford, Connecticut, and there were many lovely readers there. And I'm here tonight, and I'm doing another one next week in Michigan. And I have a couple more when I get back home. And I'm thinking about these One Book, One Community programs that seem to be proliferating at a time when we need them most. I feel sometimes a little bit of despair that our country is irreparably divided and that the gulf between two factions that seem to hate each other's guts can never be bridged. And yet that is not true. Here we all are here. We have gathered together as a community around a book. That is not a small thing. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Human beings love stories. One day, many, many millennia ago, the first talking human either walked out of a desert or walked into a cave and said, "Hey guys, guess what?" And storytelling was born. And storytelling will live until the last human dies. It is part of who we are as a species. It is baked into our DNA. And stories now do the same thing they did when those first talking humans told stories. They bring us news. They bring us warnings. They bring us entertainment and escape. They bring us feelings of being part of something bigger than ourselves, like there's a bigger human family out there. They bring us, I love the moment in any book, and I kind of read for these moments when a writer can articulate something for me that I almost know or that I knew but didn't know how to say how I knew it. It's those moments in a book that really make me glad to be literate. And sometimes the right book arrives at exactly the right time for a certain reader. There's a quote that I would read to you verbatim, but I don't have my book up here. No, it's okay, no problem. I can remember it. And it's when it's Violet is quoting, thank you, Harriet. And she says, Violet is trying to tell Misha how to read a book. And she is quoting what Harriet said to her. And what Harriet said was, the writer writes the words, the given reader reads the words, and the book, the unique and unrepeatable book, doesn't exist until the given reader meets the writer on the page. And those are words from Harriet, but those are words that I live by. I really believe that I'm also a playwright, by the way, and I feel the same way about theater, that theater can't exist without an audience. There's something that happens. There's people out there and there's people on stage, and where those two things meet, that's where the play happens. And I feel the same way, that a book is just an inanimate object that does nothing and means nothing until somebody opens it up and reads it. So it's kind of a magical thing in that way. And it doesn't even have to be a great book to do that for somebody. I'd like to tell you a little story, and it's a little personal, but it's about the power of books that don't even have to be great books. So I'm 18 years old. I'm in college. It's my first year in college. And it's in Washington, D.C., which is a very, very long way from Mexico, Maine, which is the town I grew up in. A long way in every possible way. And my friend Sally Jacobson came upon 2 tickets free to go hear Rod McEwen at Constitution Hall. Now, I don't know who remembers Rod McEwen, but he was this poet in the 70s who wrote books called things like Listen to the Warm. So it was very kind of sentimental poetry. I didn't know him at all, so I went with Sally, and we walked down to Constitution Hall. And I should add that Sally had lost her mother. Her mother had died about a month before she arrived at college, and my mother was in the process of dying. So we have these 2 18-year-old girls, first year in college. One has lost her mother, one is about to lose her mother. And we go there, I can remember exactly where we were sitting, and we look up and there he comes and he's got his book. And what we did not know is that he was going to be reading from a yet unpublished book about the death of his mother. And I can remember exactly where I was sitting and looking up, and Sally and I were holding hands, bawling our eyes out. And at that point, we were the given readers for that book. He was the writer. And what happened when what we brought met with what he brought was pure magic. Because we all bring different things to a book that we open. We all have unique life experience. We may have just experienced a death in the family, or we may have just gotten a new job. There are so many things that inform how we enter into a book. And that night, what we had was perfect for what he had. And the book happened in the middle of that. And I have a lot of poet friends who consider Rod McEwen a fairly terrible poet. But that night, for Sally and me, he was the greatest poet in the history of the English language. And I will always be grateful to him for the gift that he gave us that night. It was very needed and very beautiful. And that is what literature can do for us sometimes, which makes me grateful to be both a writer and a reader. Everybody has the experience of loving a book and immediately wanting to share it with somebody else. Just as storytelling is in our DNA, the desire to share a book that we have just read with somebody is also a very old desire, I think. We want to say, oh, you have to read this book. You're just going to love it. And if the other person loves the book the way we did, it's almost like giving them a gift and saying, I want you to feel the way I just felt when I read this. Or I think we can know each other just a little bit better if we both read and love the same book in the same way. But the thing is, really, we don't ever read the same book. We're all bringing our own stuff to a book. And often these things can be a little tricky because not everybody loves the same book that you love. And if you share a book that you love and the other person kind of hates it, it can get fairly awkward. For example, if you don't think Middlemarch is the greatest novel ever written in English or any other language, I don't think we can be friends. And I personally know of one friendship that was slightly strained because one party thought The Great Gatsby was the greatest novel written in the 20th century, and the other party thought The Great Gatsby was the most overrated novel of the 20th century. I won't tell you which party I was, and we did mend the friendship, but there was, a little bit of something there that didn't last very long, fortunately. Anyway, this is a very long way of saying that you are my given readers today. And I hope that for at least one of you, what I brought and what you brought aligned perfectly and made something a little magical happen for you. We're going to have a little conversation here in a moment, but before we do, I just want to say one thing about public libraries. This library has been absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful library. It's very lucky to be well-funded. I have a library at home, the real Portland Public Library, which is also really great. But some of you may not know that on March 14th, the Institute for Museum and Library Services was effectively disappeared because all of the employees were put on indefinite administrative leave, which for my state at least, and many states, meant that our state library suddenly lost all federal funding. And so for my state, which has a lot of rural areas, no bookmobile, no interlibrary loan. And I think we can all agree that libraries are so important to communities. Every time I go anywhere, I find the public library. And for a lot of people, they use libraries not just to borrow books, but to do a lot of other things that are needed these days. Sometimes they come in just to feel that I always feel safe in a library. That's the only word I can think of. And some people come into a library to feel safe in the most literal sense of that word. So I'd feel remiss if I didn't say, I don't know who your representatives are, but if you would just call them and ask them to stand up right now, say something and do something to restore funding to public libraries. They're so precious right now, and they're that bridge space that we need so desperately. And I don't know about you, but I crave connection right now, and libraries are one way that we can do that.
Included.
So we're going to bring out Catherine Phelps now, and she is going to have a conversation with me. And first I have to get this microphone off this thing. I did it. Okay. Hi, Catherine.
Hello. Thank you so much. And thank you to the readers that sent in questions. And so I'll just go through and share your thoughts. One of the first ones we got was, what is the origin story of this story? What inspired you to write How to Read a Book? And how did the idea for the story develop over time?
This book, it takes me 4 years to write a novel. And it takes that long because my writing process is ridiculous. So it even horrifies some of my fellow writers. I start with nothing. And I usually have like a character with a problem because nobody cares until trouble comes to town. So you need a character who has some kind of a problem. And that's what I start with. And I just start writing, and I let the language itself lead me into the story. I have no idea where it's going. So my first drafts, I write the same way I read. I write to find out what happens. And if I use, say, kind of an icy word, the story will go that way. And if I use a more toasty word, it'll go that way. And that's kind of how I navigate through a first draft, which takes a couple of years. And that's why it takes so long. And then after I write maybe 50 or 75 pages, I throw the whole thing away. It's not even on my hard drive. This is what my writer friends say, oh my God. But I've tried it other ways, and it's just, for me, it's impossible to try to like backfill or, use what you already have. Because if you think about it, what do you know on page 5? Nothing. At least the way I work, I don't have anything planned out. But on page 75, I now have a pretty good idea of who's who and what their problem might be and what the obstacles might be in their way. And so I call it the real page 1. And sometimes you have to write 100 pages to get to page 1. So that's how I think about the writing process. But this novel came the way some people who don't write novels think novels come to novelists, which is a bolt from the blue in the middle of the night. I remember it very well. It was the summer of 2019. And I was in kind of a low spot that, we get into sometimes. And when I'm in one of those places, the main symptom is insomnia. Night after night, I just wake up, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Well, this insomnia was a little different because I was being woken up by this kind of murmuring. I knew it was a monologue and I knew it was a character asking to be born. And I'd been writing plays at that point for the last year or two before that. And I remember sitting up in bed and saying to Violet, I'm very sorry. I'm a playwright now. Go find somebody else.
Wow.
I literally said that into the ether. And I thought, well, that's that. She can leave now. And I went back to bed next night, 3 a.m, same exact thing. So I thought, maybe this is just some little thing that I have to get out of my head. So I grabbed a notebook. I walked down my stairs, and it was a hot night. And it was just the screen door open, and there's a street light on my sidewalk, and I had just enough light to read by. And I opened a notebook, and I wrote what Violet was saying. I had no idea who she was. I wrote it all down, and what I wrote is basically chapter 1 of this book, of her experience in the book club in the prison. And I put it away, and I thought, okay, that's it. If I might need this sometime, I might do something with it, but it's just not right now. The next night, I swear to you, 3 o'clock in the morning, Harriet is speaking to me. And she was far less assembled. It was more like notes, and her name was Shirley at the time. And I rarely change a name. My characters always come with a name. And so it was just notes and things. It's funny, I still have that notebook, and I can look back and see the origin, which I normally don't because I throw everything away. And it's just funny to see it now. And I put that away, and that was that. And then a month or maybe 6 weeks later, I was insane with curiosity about what connected these two characters, because I knew they were connected. I just didn't know how. And Frank wasn't anywhere in the picture at all. So that's how it came to me. And I started writing the book from there.
Wow. So I'll leap to one of the questions that was asked a little later, but so then the parrots. Someone asked, how did the parrots become such central characters?
Well, anybody who's read any of my other novels know that I love putting my characters to work. They all do real jobs that actual people do, mainly because my idea of research is just talking to people about what they do. It's really fun. People love to do it. And you just glean all kinds of things. I corner people at parties. I ask them what they do. I'm sure no one likes to see me coming, but I have all kinds of ideas for jobs, and I have been waiting decades to put this job in a book, which is lab assistant to a behavioral research scientist studying avian cognition in African gray parrots. Sure. Which is an actual thing. And there's a note at the end of the book about the work of Dr. Irene Pepperberg. And I had followed her for really decades. She started doing cognitive research on parrots. And this was back in the late 70s to mid 80s, when all of the animal research it was a man's world. And all of the research was being done on large primates. And all of the scientists in the community would think bird and just think bird brain. They can't learn, they're just mimicking. And she had bought this little parrot, Alex, in a pet store when she was doing her PhD in either chemical physics or physical chemistry. I mean, nothing I would ever pick as a major. And so she started working with this little bird and realizing, oh my goodness, I think there's something here. It's really interesting to read her book. She has a book called Alex and Me, Alex was her first parrot that she did this with. And they are well-designed studies. She's famous the world over. And the idea that parrots can think and calculate. I mean, they can count objects. It's really amazing. So I emailed her when I decided, okay, I finally found a way to put this in a book. And I had to email her 3 times. She was a little bit wary of me. And it turned out it's because she said that the last time a writer came to her lab, she ended up being the murderer in his book. So I told her that I promised that I would not make her a murderer. And I said, nobody's going to think you're this scientist because he's a Russian man. And I also promised her that I would be very respectful of the birds and the research, because I do respect her research and the birds. So she said, okay, you can come down. And so I went to Harvard. I didn't go to Harvard. I went to Harvard to visit the birds. And it was a winter day, and it's about 2 hours south of the real Portland. And so I get there, and I walk into the lab, and there are these 2 parrots that she's now working with. One is Athena, who was 8 when I met her. And she was kind of a party girl, flibbity-gibbet, who didn't really love doing the studies. And the other one was Griffin, who was 23 when I met, or 25 maybe. He just celebrated his 30th birthday, actually. And so he's hitting his stride as far as what he can be taught and what he knows. And she thinks he's even smarter than Alex, who was famous the world over. And so they ran me through some of the things that they did. And I was just melting into my shoes, really. And the thing about research like this, it wasn't so much to, I could have done this from YouTube, because they're on YouTube, and I could read about it. But there was something about the sensory details that I needed to really kind of get into the idea of what this lab must have felt like, what it smelled like, what it feels like to have a parrot sitting on your shoulder, which is, in a word, awesome. They only weigh about 1 pound, but it's a very present weight, and they get these little claws, and they're also extremely warm. Their temperature is, I think, 109, might be 108. And it was a cold day that day. It was wintertime. And I walked in, and Athena, just like Bob in the book, picks her foot up like this and goes like that. Oh my God. So the lab assistant who was there said, oh, that means she wants to get on your shoulder. I said, really? She picked me? It was really flattering. And so he said, just go over and say shoulder. So I went over, I said shoulder, and she just stepped over, and the whole time, there's a picture, that's Athena, the picture at the end of the book, which my editor insisted on putting in. I thought it was a little much, but I've learned to listen to the 15-year-olds at my publishing company. So anyway, that's the story of the parrots. And I could talk about them all night. I just love them so much.
Yeah, your love for them comes through for sure. So a reader asks, In the Garden is one of my favorite hymns.
Aww.
What is the story behind choosing this beautiful song?
Oh my goodness. Well, I grew up Catholic, so we grew up, singing Tantum ergo sacramentum, that one. I mean, all my hymns were in Latin. So what can I say? And this is a totally Baptist hymn, but I heard it at a memorial service once. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a beautiful song. And, I'm just trying to imagine Violet's world. She grew up in a very Baptist, Protestant household, opposite of how I grew up, but deeply religious, which I also grew up deeply religious Catholic. My uncle was a Catholic priest. And I picked it because I really thought it was a pretty song, and it was one that I think a bird could pick up. We had a parakeet when I was a kid, and he could sing several bars of Sugar Time. Because my mother would sing it to him all day long. Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar at supper time. And you hear it in this little funny, scratchy voice. It's adorable. So I really wanted one of the parrots to learn a song because of my childhood parakeet.
A reader asks, were there any particular authors or literary works that influenced your writing of how to read a book?
I wouldn't say of that book in particular, but I think most authors have a writer in their lives who made them believe it was possible to be a writer. And for me, that was J.D. Salinger. I was in high school and I came across the 9 stories by J.D. Salinger, and they were written before I was born, and yet they felt so contemporary to me. And, we'd been reading, Victorians, and, I thought, wait, people can talk like actual people talk in books. I didn't realize that. And I absolutely loved them. And one of my very favorite books now is Franny and Zooey, it's really 2 novellas, which I use in the book. That's one of the books I use with the women. And I love that one for very many reasons. But one is that it was written in the 40s, but it feels so contemporary to me. He had that magical way of just getting inside a character and using the vernacular of the time to make them feel like somebody you just ran into on the street. And I aspire to do that as well. So he was a turning point author for me in my life.
Thank you.
Before you go on, I just remembered there's another research thing that I loved doing for this book, and that was for Frank. So Frank, I'm wondering, there's probably some people in here who have not read this book yet. Or if they're anything like me, they read it a month ago and can't remember a thing about it. There's that. So just to remind you, so there are 3 characters. One is Violet Powell. She's a 22-year-old young woman from a little town in Maine, and she is just finishing up a prison sentence for a vehicular manslaughter drunk driving accident in which she killed a kindergarten teacher. And the next character is Harriet, who is a retired English teacher who is now the volunteer book club leader in the prison where Violet is serving her time. And then we have Frank Daigle, who is a retired machinist, and he is now working as a handyman in Wadsworth Books, which is based on Longfellow books in Portland. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So, yeah, it doesn't take a genius to figure out where I got it. And Frank is the widower of the person that Violet killed in the accident. These 3 characters meet one morning in the bookstore, and after that, their meeting catalyzes a plot that visits themes of friendship and love and found family, which is a theme I return to over and again. And in this one in particular, the theme of forgiveness. And not just forgiveness, but self-forgiveness, which I find as a student of the human animal, which most authors are, I find that we have a lot harder time. We give the grace of forgiveness very easily to others, and we find it so hard to give that same grace to ourselves. So that's something that not just Violet, but some of the other characters are struggling with in this novel.
Yes. One of the readers asked something similar. What are some of the other central themes you wanted to explore in this novel? So forgiveness certainly comes through.
Yeah.
Are there any other themes?
Well, I love the theme of found family. A lot of my books have, I say that I assemble families out of broken and spare parts in my novels. And because I think a lot of us do that, even if we have close families of origin, which I do, I have a very wide sort. That's just how I live my life. Is I do assemble family wherever I go. Everything is personal. I make friends with colleagues, and it's just I love friendship. And I have very dear friends who have gotten me through some extremely dark times, and that's what friends are for. What would we do without our friends?
Yeah.
So that's I love friendships in novels.
Was there any research with the prison system? Was that anything that...
I wouldn't call it research. It's something that was in my life. So about 10 years ago, for a period of 3 years, I volunteered at the Wyndham Correctional Center, which is one of the 2 state prisons in Maine. And this one is about 7 miles from my house. And it's the only one that has a women's unit. And if you're a woman offender in the state of Maine and you have a sentence of 14 months or more, that's where you go. And if you have to serve time, it's not a bad place. It was considered very progressive at the time. It was built in the early 70s, I believe. And it has a lot of light. The day room looks exactly like the prison I described in the novel. That comes straight from my experience. And Harriet's feelings about being there come straight from my experience. But I deliberately did not make any of the women like the women I had for obvious reasons. And the women in the book are far more profane than my students were. They were very polite to me and very respectful. And I think they also thought of me as kind of a little goody two shoes, and they'd tease me about it actually. But the best compliment they ever gave me is they said, we decided that we think you would do really well in prison. And I was flattered. I thought, I would do really well in prison. There's a lot of time to write. I'd make friends, But anyway, so it was a program that wasn't exactly like what Harriet does. What I did was it started when the Maine Humanities Council, which is a great organization, decided they were going to do a one and done book group for, I think it was maybe 8 weeks in the women's unit at the Wyndham Correctional Center. And they used one of my earlier books, which is called Ernie's Ark. And it's set in a small Maine town. And most of the women in the unit are, they're like me. They're small town Maine girls. And they have a few people that come in from other states because of overcrowding and things like that. But mostly it's just, a bunch of Maine girls. And I'm very easy to find. So the person who was running the book group said, would you mind coming for our last meeting? And you can visit with the women and they can ask you questions and you can sign their book, which was the biggest deal. I had no idea what a big deal this would be. So I went over and it was the most interesting book discussion I think I have ever had with anybody. They asked very insightful questions. They had read it deeply and thoroughly, and they were delighted to meet the author. It was really a wonderful experience. And I remember getting home that day and I said to my husband, I don't know how to explain this, but I felt completely at home there. Completely at home. I felt like I just belonged there and I wanted to go back and do something. And he said, well, why don't you volunteer to do something? I'm thinking, well, what do I have? And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I just did a book club. I mean, I am a writer. So the next day, I wrote up this little syllabus. I just made it up as I went along, and it was called Meet the Authors. And the idea is that I would have 12 women for 12 weeks, and we would read 4 books by 4 Maine women writers. And the writing community in Maine is very close-knit. You cannot swing a cat without hitting a writer in Maine. And we all know each other. And people come in, especially lately, from Hollywood and from New York, and they say, oh my God, you guys are so nice. And it's like, well, why is this where do you come from? This sounds really bad. So anyway, so we're going to read 4 books, and the 4 women writers, of course, were women I knew, and it was 4 different genres. So we did a children's book, a poetry book, a book of personal essays, and a book of science writing, which was a big hit, believe it or not. That's my friend Hannah Holmes, who writes incredible lay science books. And so the idea is we would read the books, and then on the last day of our discussion, I would invite my friend and author to come in and do what I had done. Except this time, we would together devise a writing assignment for the women based on the genre we had just been reading in. And that was the best part of the whole thing. And that surprised me. They loved the writing part. So it was supposed to last 12 weeks each time, and about half of them would leave at the end of the 12 weeks and get their points for good behavior and all of that. And then about half of the others would want to stick around. So the 12-week would become like 14 weeks or 16 weeks. One of them went 20 weeks because they really wanted to finish their writing projects. And there was this one time with one of my groups, I persuaded them, I asked the powers that be, and you never know what answer you're going to get, if they could do a public reading at town meeting for the other people in the prison. And they said yes. And 5, I think, of the 12 agreed to do it. They were all, very shy about it. And I remember the day we did it, my heart was thumping in my throat because you just never know. And it was a huge hit. I mean, someone read a poem. They were all mothers. So one read a poem about missing her children and everybody was crying. And somebody else, this was from the science writing, somebody wrote this hilarious essay in kind of a Wild Kingdom nature documentary voice about living there and like lining up at the watering hole and this and that. It was really funny, but it was like animals on the safari. And I'm thinking, oh my God, please make this be okay. And they thought it was hysterical. But the best part of that for me was sitting on the sidelines, and I see my students who I'd gotten to know reading their work for 88 other women who were there. And the COs were, around in the perimeter looking for trouble, which is what their job is. And at some point, I noticed that they were all just looking at whoever the reader was. And I can't describe the feeling. There's at one point in the book, Harriet says something about that, they're all wearing the same clothes, of course, and that she can't believe she ever thought they were interchangeable, but that was the whole idea, that you heard them around as one entity, like a group of cows. And she says something like, but anybody who's ever known more than one cow knows that they have ways of making you know who is who. It's something, paraphrasing myself badly, but that's how I felt that day. Like suddenly they were individual people with talent and making people laugh and cry. It was really profound.
Great. Yes, I think the humanity of your book really comes through, and the humanity for individuals in correctional facilities. And certainly the story of Violet's integration is really touching. Mm-hmm. What are some stigmas that you hope this novel helps people sort of connect to and understand about people released from prison and their integration into society?
Well, I don't think of my work that way. Like I want people to come away with a lesson or something like that. But I just want my characters to feel real.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned when I was doing that work is how thin the line is between us and them. As I said, we were all just small town Maine girls, and you make one really rotten mistake and your whole life goes that way in a second sometimes. And I have to say also, a lot of these mistakes were because of bad men.
Yeah.
A lot of them were victims themselves of things. And, it's not to say that some of them had not done some very bad things and deserved to be punished for doing those bad things. But we don't think this, but any of us could be on the other side of that line.
Right. That's Frank. Frank shares that.
Well, Frank,
the latter part of the story.
Yes, when he forgives Violet and he says, I was drinking pretty good at one point. And, I hit a mailbox on the way into my driveway and it's there, but for the grace of God, and a lot of us have had that experience of like, should I be driving right now? And we do it anyway because we think, oh, I'm fine. These things could happen to anybody.
Right. Great. These are similar to some of the things you've shared with us. Mm-hmm. The title, How to Read a Book, suggests a focus.
Don't get me started on the title of this book.
How does the title relate to the novel's plot and themes?
I've gotten used to it. But the real title of this book is Meanwhile. And yes, you can all agree that it's a way better title. Some people do disagree. So this is how it happened. It used to be in the olden days when I was first publishing that a writer would submit a manuscript, a editor would fall in love with it, and it would be published. And now it's a very different thing. These are big conglomerates. The people who are there, like I adore my editor. I adore all the people on my team. They are book lovers. They are writer lovers. They're just marvelous people. But these things, they're owned by, holding companies, and some are owned by book companies, not all of them. And it's called the Big Five. So it's Random House, Hachette, HarperCollins, which is where I am. And I can't remember the two others right now. So I'm publishing with Mariner Books, which is one of the 100 imprints of HarperCollins. So now what happens is even if you're a seasoned writer, you submit the manuscript, to your agent, and your agent submits it to an editor. And then the editor kind of reads it and works with you a little bit, and then parcels it out to other people in the company who also have to read it and like it. And it's honest to God, it's anybody from the receptionist, because the receptionist is really young and they want to know what a young person thinks. It's like a big focus group. And the sales and marketing people especially read it. And the paperback editor, there's just a whole falderall about all this now. It's much more complicated than it used to be, and much more uncertain than it used to be. So this was all set to go. And I get an email from Jessica, my lovely agent, who is 28 years old. And I had never worked with all my editors had been more or less my age, but now I'm so old, they're all younger. But my editor that I had for my previous two books, her name is Dan Ermy, and she was at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I loved her. We're around the same age. She was, we'd both been around the publishing barn many times. We knew how to manage expectations. We knew what was what. And so this book, she decided that she wasn't positive she was still going to be around by the time the book came out. I don't mean around on Earth. I mean, she was thinking about retiring. So she said, I'd like to give this book to my protege. She's been my assistant editor for 3 years. And I think she's really smart and she's a good editor and she's really going places. And I said, great. And she said, but she's 25 years old, just so you know. And I said, well, let me talk to her. And I just wasn't sure, we would be simpatico. I mean, it's generations between us. And I loved her. She's a wise old soul. She's now a wise old lady of 29, I think. We just got along great. She totally got the book. And she did what a good editor does, is she didn't try to bend the book to her will or even to my will exactly, but she tried to respect what the book wanted to be. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's a thing, believe me. And so that worked out really, really well. So I get an email from her one day. I'm sitting in my studio, minding my own business, and I get an email that says, hi, so everything's all ready to go, but sales and marketing has a question about the title. So clickety click. What is the question? Well, they think it might be a little too quiet and literary. I write back, that's what I was going for. And she writes back, she's so sweet. And she was the middleman in this. And she says, well, we were just thinking something just a little more commercial. And it turns out that they've done a ton of research on this. And books that have the word book in the title sell really well. I'm not making this up.
Wow.
I said, you don't say. And even though everybody in sales and marketing is 15, I have learned to listen to them because they know a lot more than I do about these things. And I said, all right, let me just give it a shot. And I'm thinking book. I don't know, book. And there's like a billion, it's like its own subgenre of, the book ladies of this and the something book club and the, oh my heavens. But then it just popped into my head how to read a book. I thought, well, that maybe could work. I hate it, but it might be able to work. And because, Harriet is teaching her students how to read a book in a new way. And when you get to the end, you realize really that Violet has been teaching you how to read this book. So I thought, I don't know, it's awful, but let me start. So I said, okay, what about how to read a book? 1 nanosecond later, email comes back. oh, I think that sounds really interesting. I'm thinking, well, that's it. That's going to be the title of the book. There's going to be no backsies. It's out there. They have it in their clutches. That's the title of the book. And it was. So I have gotten used to it. The same thing happened with my previous novel. And before that, no one had ever suggested changing a title. And it's just the way it is now. And I find it amusing more than anything else. But that's how it got its title.
Thank you. I think we're just about out of time, but I did want to ask, someone asked, what's next?
Oh my goodness. Well, what's next is I have a big backlist, so you can start on that. If you liked this book, I think you would really like The 1 in a Million Boy, which is I wrote before this. And 2 of my books have just been but last year were republished in later editions. And one is a novel called Any Bitter Thing, and the other is a book called Ernie's Ark. As far as what's next, I've been on the road for a year, so I have written nothing. And as soon as I get home, I have cleared the summer, and summer in Maine is a good thing to clear. I've cleared the summer, and I'm going to start working, probably not on a novel. It's probably going to be a play. I'm not sure yet. But I've written 3 plays, and I love writing plays. I love actors. They're so emotional and fun. So I think that, but it could be a novel. I'm not quite sure yet. But anyway.
We'll find out 3 a.m.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you to all of the audience for bringing your questions. Thank you.